morning from Beacon Sanctuary in Summit, New Jersey, on the land of the Lenni Lenape. I am Janet Roberts, she, her, a member of our shared community since 2005. I want to personally welcome each one of you. I remember the bright smiles and warm welcomes that greeted me the first time I stepped through Beacon's doors. With my husband and our young children, we felt immediately like we had found a home. Whether this is your first time here or your 1000th time, I hope you experience that same warm feeling when you walk through our doors. Over the last 5 years, I've had the honor of serving on Beacon's Board of Trustees. I agreed to serve on the board because I care deeply about Beacon. I had received so many gifts from being a part of this loving community, and I wanted to give back. I never dreamed that this service would give me a whole other layer of gifts, that serving on the board would be such a moving experience, one of personal and spiritual growth and deep bonds with fellow board members. It is a privilege to be able to guide this congregation's mission. In the past year, this work has had a profound impact on me as I have helped lead our embrace of the 8th principle, which calls on us to dismantle racism not just in the broader world, but within our own walls. I can see how this work is like a spider plant, how the individual roots of change that we plant here at Beacon branch out, inspiring hope and driving change here at Beacon and out there in the larger world. This is our work. Do you hear the call? I invite you to explore the ways our mission invites us to serve. Bring your curiosity today at 12:30 p.m. in the library upstairs, where our nominating committee will hold an open house to answer questions about serving on the board. If you are online, reach out to them directly at nomcom@summitbeacon.org. They'd love to speak with you, and I know that any member of the board would too. I know firsthand that these conversations are a great way to explore your personal call to service. So good morning again to all of you, and welcome to Beacon, a religious community striving to be radically inclusive, feed the human spirit, and heal the world. This morning, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism, we invoke the voice of a child who fled with her parents from her home in Czechoslovakia, torn up by war from an invading neighboring country. A child who found sanctuary in the United States and liberation in democracy. A child whose fierce spirit, experience, and wisdom led her to become the first female-identified Secretary of State. We kindle our chalice with the voice of Madeleine Albright, who said, "The act of striving is in itself the only way to keep faith with life." May this flame rekindle our faith in life and embolden our striving toward our great mission.
On the first day of kindergarten, Maya met a person who immediately became her best friend and has remained so for the last 4 years. Her name is Maya too, except spelt differently, Maya with a Y instead of an I. In school, they are identified by the first letter of their last names. Maya, whom we have met since the pandemic began, is Maya C, and her friend Maya with a Y is Maya N. They have a lot in common. Both Mayas have brown skin. Both Mayas love math and science, poetry, and playing on swings. And both love planning the kinds of ribbons they will wear in their hair. There are some differences. Maya C is an only child, meaning she has no siblings. Maya N's parents came from India, and she has an older brother and a younger sister. Maya C attends an Unitarian Universalist congregation, and Maya N goes to a Hindu temple. Sometimes the two Mayas go with one another to attend the other's house of worship. Maya C has gone with her friend to the Hindu temple during Diwali and Holi, which just finished for this year. Maya N has gone to water communion for the backpack blessing at the Unitarian Universalist congregation, as well as Passover and Easter services. There's always lots of excellent music and exciting things to do. Just like the two Mayas, the houses of worship also have things in common. Their buildings are sort of square, and they also have a flame that is sacred to each one of them. They both are tall, reaching up to the skies with a pointy top. There are also some important differences. The UU congregation is an old building built in the 20th century with very few decorations on the walls, but lots of green plants inside and outside. The beauty of the sanctuary invites slowing down and silence and listening. A lot of listening while sitting in a circle and seeing each other. The Hindu temple is a much newer building, and the building itself seems to exude liveliness. It reminds Maya C of the house in the Encanto movie she and Maya N recently watched together, as if the building itself were alive. So many happy and kind people moving around, visiting with each god, talking over the singing and bell ringing, and receiving a sweet treat from each one, something Maya C really enjoys. She's going to suggest it to her ministers. Sometimes the girls wonder how their communities would grow and adapt if they exchanged buildings. How would the Hindu temple bring more liveliness, sights, sounds, smells into the UU community? How would the Unitarian Universalist meeting house bring more silence and contemplation into the Hindu community? The Mayas giggle together as they imagine it. Have you ever visited another house of worship with a friend? How was the building a living part of the community? Tell us your stories, and stay tuned for more about our two Mayas. Here ends our story for all ages.
Good morning. I am here today to ask for your financial contribution to First Friends, an organization that I believe in. I'd like to begin by telling a story. A few weeks ago, I received an email that Christian, a 21-year-old man, was being released in a few hours from the Union County Detention Center. Christian was born and was raised in Nicaragua. He had fled that country since his life was in danger from the drug gangs that wanted to recruit him. He had traveled on his own by land to the Texas border, where he had requested asylum to live in the U.S. After being arrested, he was flown to a detention center in New Jersey, where he did not know anyone, and had been imprisoned for the past 2 months. You should know that Christian does not speak or understand English either. The email I received was from First Friends, an organization of mostly volunteers, including a number of us at Beacon, who try to help such detainees. First Friends had already provided legal representation to Christian to help him with his application, and a bond to allow Christian to be released from detention while he waited for his next court date. Such bonds average $8,000. In addition, since Christian had a friend in Kansas City where he was approved to stay during this period, First Friends had purchased an airline ticket for him to get there. However, Christian still needed to be picked up from the detention center, housed for the night, fed, and brought to Newark Airport the next day to board his flight. In addition, detainees are released with only the clothes on their back and limited bus fare. That is why I had received an email from First Friends that day. I was available, and together with other Beacon members who assisted me and a translator, a very scared and frightened Christian was picked up, driven to a store to get a winter jacket and proper shoes, and then given a warm meal and a bed to sleep in. He was also provided a backpack, which contained a change of clothing and underwear, and brought to the airport the next day. Beacon members had worked with First Friends for the past 6 years. Volunteers used to be allowed to visit detainees on a bi-weekly basis to give them a friend to talk to and to help keep their spirits up during the many months of detention, since most do not have family or friends in the area. However, COVID stopped such visits. Now we help out when they are released. First Friends also supports detainees while they are in detention through a phone hotline, where they can call First Friends to report problems in detention and to ask for help connecting to their family and to coordinate legal counsel. First Friends also stays in touch with family members of the detainees who are outside the country to apprise them of the detainees' whereabouts, give updates on their asylum case, and to convey messages. First Friends provides commissary cash cards to people in detention so they can make phone calls and purchase toiletries and food. First Friends operates a bond fund that allows detainees to be released from detention and pursue their asylum case in the community rather than behind bars. Without the ability to pay a bond, detainees would remain in detention while their asylum case was being decided, which can take from several months to several years. Trying to obtain even minimal legal counsel for detainees is also very expensive. I ask that you join me today in financially supporting the great work of First Friends through Beacon for the coming year. Immigrant justice is one of my priorities at Beacon, and I hope that it is yours too. Please watch now for how you can make a tax-deductible donation today. Thank you.
Our reading today is entitled CPR Class in Here, and I am its author. The Beacon UU congregation recently purchased 1.8 acres of land just down the street here in Summit, New Jersey. It's exciting. And while we are considering architects, my office and the ministerial intern's office, Nicole Jacobson, are at the new location. She's there about 2 weeks out of every 2 months in her multimodal internship from Alabama. By consequence, I have a lot of time alone in a large early 20th century home that was for the last 60 years home to the American Red Cross. The story is told as local lore that it was originally built by an industrialist for his spouse. And, however, she had some mixed reviews upon first seeing the home and living there. She said she felt it was just too quiet. After nearly 2 years of being home with 4 children ages 3 to 16 in various stages of remote learning and a spouse who is also a minister, I must say, I disagree. It is delightful to be alone. Quiet. It's like a slow, hot shower for my soul. Having been converted from a mansion to a nonprofit office space for over half a century makes it a little quirky, to say the least. Doors lead to more doors and sometimes to nowhere. Thanks for being a blood donor stickers regularly slip out of closets and cupboards. In the attic, 2 metal bedpans sit amongst a thick layer of dust. In the atrium, a glance upwards takes you to a large red cross backlit, almost like stained glass. Of all the quirks, however, my favorite is the paper sign that reads, CPR class in here. It's written in black, handwritten letters, and there's a smiley face. The paper is old and weathered. Over the last few months of being alone in this extravagant storied space, I need to pass by that CPR sign every day as it leads to a room that leads to a room that leads to a door that leads to the bathroom. The CPR sign has become a mirror of sorts for my own emotional and spiritual state. Some days, it's a panicked note. CPR class in here, in a black marker scrawled hastily as if medics are bringing in unconscious people at any moment in need of reviving and unfortunately reliant upon this hastily assembled class. It is as if the person writing it was told to prepare for a sudden arrival of patients, and all they could think to do was write the sign. They had the smiley face as a last desperate plea via emoji for hope. I empathize some days with them as I emoji my way through email and text and all manner of catastrophe. Other days, it is a faithful and weathered sign made by those who plan for crisis and think of the worst so the rest of us can do what needs to be done when something awful happens. I read the sign on these days as if perhaps Winston Churchill or Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. are narrating the sign with a reassuring, driving pace. CPR class in here, beloved. On rough and tumble mornings, it's a routine note that is almost thoughtless, but now in the present pandemic becomes tragic. Some just starting off student tasked to write a sign for Thursday's class. Hey, Tanya, can you make sure we put the sign up for the CPR class? I imagine Tanya shuffling through a drawer of broken pencils and uncapped dry markers until she falls upon the black Sharpie. With a sigh, she writes, CPR class in here. Pausing to consider which way the arrow needs to point and then concluding, forget the arrow, I'm just going to put a smiley face. All those eager lifeguards, babysitters, and teachers gathered on Thursday, pulsing on the chests of half-bodied mannequins and breathing into their mouths in what could only be described as a bizarre super spreader event today. Some days I pause for the ghosts of those mundane trainings when we could exhale and inhale without fear. On good nights, when I'm there late and alone, it is a hopeful note that declares there were always people who were busy with children pulling on them, jobs that meant mopping floors and typing past midnight, meals in motion, terrifying diagnoses, loss, and dreams that stirred them in the night. It is a hopeful note that tells us there were those who, in all that can take us down, decided to learn how to save a human life, one that could never be their own. On these days, I imagine a medic who has taught the class for 20 years, carefully and with a sense of duty, pulling that black Sharpie from a pocket, as if it was waiting to remind us. CPR class, in here. The smiley face is faithful and reassuring. It's not at all naive, but rather the worn smile of an experienced one who knows there is a day beyond this one, a goodness and a joy on the other side of the door. On these days, I open that door and I pass the threshold, tracing the smile with my fingers, and I utter a 2-worded prayer as I do so. Thank you.
Settling into a time of contemplation, meditation, and reflection, we bring ourselves to the present moment, noticing our feet on the floor, the touch of the air and the fabric against our skin, noticing our spines, becoming aware of our external environment first, and then our internal environment. And the two are connected and related. Perhaps our internal state reflects what is going on outside of us, either in the weather or the climate or in the very room that we are in. The 4 walls which surround us, or if we are out for a walk, the open air, can mirror our emotional and spiritual state. We take note of the relationship and the connection, observing without judgment what the relationship is between the outside and the inside. As we sit in quiet, we allow there to arise in our mind's eye an image of the room that we might have had when we were a teenager. Perhaps we shared its space with others. Perhaps it was ours alone to claim. What was on the walls then? Perhaps, like me, you had a poster of a rock star or an activist. Perhaps there were things hanging from the ceiling. How did these mirror your emotional and spiritual states? How have the rooms we have traveled through changed over time? How have they reflected who we are, mirrored who we are? What space calls you now? What space holds you now? In what space do you feel most yourself? Perhaps there are altars you turn to for sustenance and comfort. Perhaps there are childhood houses and homes that you can call up at a moment's notice to return to a state of emotional and spiritual calm. Perhaps the mirror is as still as the top of a still lake, undisturbed and calm with very few ripples. Perhaps there are doors that lead to more doors, and walls that hold memories on which we have left our mark. We are able to create spaces that mirror our emotional and spiritual state. In this, we may rest. In this, we may be mindful and aware. Becoming aware once again of where we are, of the space we are in, we lengthen our breath and return to the present moment. Here ends our meditation.
Good morning, Beacon. My name is Kathleen Grant, and I am a member of the Beacon Chaplain team. As chaplains, we are part of the living stream of spiritual care that flows in from our community and extends to every one of us. We live into our Beacon mission by being present by those who may be experiencing loss, grief, or a challenging life situation. Let us enter now into our sacred ritual of candle lighting, an ancient spiritual practice that calls upon us to reflect in remembrance of loved ones lost or those dear ones in need of healing, hope, and peace, including and especially the people of Ukraine. We begin by putting our hands on our hearts. Feel the beating of your heart and feel our collective presence with you. If there's a struggle on your heart, if you're holding a person or place that is struggling, you can write it in the chat. Today, we light a candle for the people of Ukraine. We hold them in our hearts and pray for the end of the brutal madness of war. We ask for inspiration to lend more than just our hearts. We also hold close to our hearts our partner church in Beirut, Romania, where the echoes of war are too near, and the people throughout that region of the world whose communities are living with unspeakable fear. May our candles reflect the light of a peace that passes all understanding, a peace that transcends distance and time. And may that peace be known to all who are living in fear, in Ukraine and everywhere. With each candle lit, may each one of us know that we are held in the care and love of our community. It can be difficult at times like these, but it is also necessary and healthy to recognize that there are joys all around us and in our own lives. We celebrate the first week of spring with increased brightness and longer days and shorter nights. Everywhere we look, we can see green life emerging from trees and gardens, the return to skies of brilliantly colored wings soaring in the wind, and the music of beautiful birdsong that lifts us up and brightens our hearts. In our Beacon community, we celebrate the many ways our members are living into our mission. We hold up the work of all of our members who are advocating for social and environmental justice and to the vitality that groups like our Widening the Circle Committee are bringing to our commitment to the 8th principle of dismantling racism. We celebrate the work of our members, of our Spring Forward fundraiser, and our online garage sale, who are dedicating so much of their creativity and passion for helping us all to nurture and grow our beloved Beacon community, not just for us, but those who will come after us. Beloved, for these gifts and so much more, we give thanks.
Universalists like myself often get asked the same question. When explaining what universalism is and has been historically, people tend to get behind the notion of a loving God and the fact that everyone will go to heaven. They like the ideas of Hosea Ballou, the 19th century father of universalism, who said, "Why would a loving God infinitely punish a finite creature, that's us, for finite crimes? Where is love in that?" Hosea Ballou asks. Where is redemption and restoration? Has God not considered redemption and restoration? People generally get behind these ideas, and then it's as if I can see the thought bubble forming in their mind, and I know that it is in that moment that Hitler has entered the picture. They'll kind of crinkle their eyes and give you a side eye and say, "You mean to tell me that universalists believe that even Hitler goes to heaven?" It's always Hitler. Well, that's not true. These days, it tends to be Vladimir Putin or the Sackler family or the bully in 7th grade. I will never forget the Sunday at Beacon some years back now when Reverend Mark Morrison Reed, who was preaching that day, answered that exact question. Does Hitler go to heaven? Yes, said Reverend Mark with tears in his eyes. That's what faith in a loving God is. It means that even Hitler is loved into redemption and goes to heaven. That's the faith of a universalist. It's the world that we imagine into being. On a beautifully warm Saturday night last week, right on the cusp of spring, members gathered in this sanctuary, sat in a circle for our Green Vespers service. The windows were open, and I have to tell you, it felt like heaven had arrived in our sanctuary. Leader Helen Kerr shared with us that night her poem called Faith Is. Faith is showing up, she began. Sorrow is faith. Faith hurt. Faith is process, miracles out of dust, persistent imperfection. She concluded her poem, and then we turned to the group and said, how would you finish that sentence? Faith is. We then entered into a Mad Libs meditation where they were asked to fill in that blank. Except the group stared blankly back at us, each holding their pad of paper and their pencil, not knowing what to do. What is faith for a Unitarian Universalist? Are we not known for the faith we don't have rather than the faith that we do have? Nevertheless, I have to tell you, the group persisted. And one by one, participants finished the sentence and shared it with one another. One in particular talked about meeting a person with such profound faith in a higher power, in a God, but without any proof. And he marveled at it. It reminded me of a time when I was struggling mightily with the God that was presented to me by society. I shared my struggle with a mentor at that time who listened and really affirmed my struggle. Then he asked me a question that was filled with curiosity. What about humanity, Emily? Do you believe in the goodness of humanity? Yes, I answered. I really do. And then he asked me, well, what proof do you have in the goodness of humanity? I was kind of stumped. I had just as much proof in humanity's evil as humanity's goodness. Nevertheless, my faith was unwavering. My mentor smiled and said, well, I understand your struggle. And I have to tell you that I have no proof of the God in my heart, of my heart. But my faith is unwavering. Speaking of unwavering faith, have you ever wondered why we call you beloved each week? The word itself, beloved, originated in the English language in the late Middle Ages. One word, be love, almost like the two words, be love, but together. Beloved. My favorite example of the word beloved in a sentence comes from the CNN correspondent Casey Barber, who said, Cornish pasties were popularized as a food for miners, but are now so beloved that they're protected by geographic origin. I love myself some Cornish pasties. Beloved, therefore, is an adjective used to describe something, often food, but more often someone we love deeply, unconditionally, without requirements or limitations. A love of unwavering faithfulness. Calling someone beloved is, in fact, a statement of faith. We place our faith in you, in us, and our relationship together. Whether or not you have proven yourself worthy of such a love, whether or not we have proven ourselves worthy of such love, it just is. You just are beloved. Deeply, unconditionally, unwaveringly. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. described 3 types of love: eros, philia, and agape. Eros being romance, philia being friendship, and agape. Agape was what he centered his ministry in. It was the love of the divine operating in the human heart. And so when we say, beloved, we are evoking the love of agape. Dr. King said, agape does not begin by discriminating between worthy and unworthy people. It begins by loving others, and I would argue ourselves, for our sakes. That is the faith of a universalist. That's why Reverend Mark Morrison Reed had tears in his eyes that day in our sanctuary. It's not an easy faith. Human beings try so very hard to make themselves unlovable. Nevertheless, we believe that each one of us is worthy of love. As Brian Stevenson says, we are each more than the worst thing we have ever done. That is a statement of faith. The sanctuary we now inhabit was built to center agape. At the turn of the 20th century, a house stood here on the corner of Springfield and Waldron Avenues in Summit, New Jersey. The town of Summit, with some 7,000 residents, had religious congregations of most major Protestant denominations and a Roman Catholic church. The Jewish community would not be established until 1923. Nevertheless, a growing number of residents wanted to create a spiritual community that emphasized love as the core of religion and ethics that would flow out of that love. In 1911, after living out of the local Masonic Hall and then the Women's Institute, that spiritual community decided to build their own sanctuary. And what type of sanctuary, they asked, would allow love to flourish? Our founders knew that spaces mattered. As Winston Churchill later said, we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. A member of the congregation at that time, Joy Wheeler Dow, an architect, was commissioned to design the sanctuary. He went with the simplicity of form and color embodied in colonial New England meeting houses. Meeting houses were built in New England, where they were built in contrast to the ornate, rigid Anglican sanctuaries. They were all about simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. No stained glass, no statues, no decorations. After all, before the Puritans fled those ornate Anglican sanctuaries, they shattered out all of the stained glass. And so our sanctuary is definitely not the colorful and vibrant architecture of Maya N's Hindu temple in our story. It is all about simplicity. A simplicity that gifts many who enter this sanctuary with a sense of openness. It has the potential to welcome into our lives a stillness, a sense of calm from the frenetic outside world, reminding us, grounding us in what really matters, making space in our lives for what really matters. Puritan architecture also reflected a symmetry, as if the building could even be folded in half and everything matching the other side. The building mirrored a sense of order and rationality, something championed by Puritans. And so Puritan ideals gave shape to architecture, and then their architecture has since shaped us. This with simplicity and openness, with stillness and balance. And these things over the last 122 years, something like that, it has allowed love to flourish, I believe, right here. But it has also had its limits. The Puritans established a religious order that was equally rigid to the Anglican ones that they fled. There was religious freedom in America at that time, as long as you were Puritan. And I have to say that, unfortunately, I believe that we have inherited some of that rigidity. We talk about this when we talk about this is a community for like-minded folks. How wonderful it is, how nice it is to finally have a community, people say, with other like-minded people, people who like quiet and symmetry, reason and order, and who clap on the one and the three. Now, I have to say, I laugh at that last bit because I am a person who likes quiet and symmetry, a person who likes reason and order, and yes, unfortunately, I tend to clap on the 1 and the 3. But universalism asks more of us. It doesn't ask us to deny those things. It just asks us to make space for more than that, for one another, for the diversity that flows into this space. I've got teenagers, and so I witness with some poignancy every day children and youth struggling with whether they are enough to be loved, enough to belong, enough to be worthy. And I wonder, as people enter our sanctuary each and every Sunday, I wonder when they enter, do they feel like they have to bring their best selves in order to belong, in order to be loved? Or can they show up as themselves and be loved in spite of the worst thing they have ever done? I want so badly for all of us a love and a space that liberates us from the rigidity that excludes the harder parts of ourselves. We are beloved. That is a statement of faith, not because we've learned how to be Puritan or cisgender or white, but because we are human. That is why we love. Dr. King said, agape does not begin by discriminating between worthy and unworthy people. It begins by loving others and ourselves for our sakes. My question is, what architecture will liberate us from that rigidity, from that dominant culture that says only some are worthy? This weekend, our facilities expansion team is visiting houses of worship and asking just that. What architecture, what space will allow love and liberation to flourish? As most of you are aware, Beacon bought a new property just a mile down Springfield Avenue. A former residence turned into an American Red Cross building. I love that. I love that for generations, people have learned to save lives in that building, on that land where we will call home. They have learned to save people's hearts, to save lives. And I imagine that will continue. I've been imagining that day, that first day when we enter the sanctuary, and I have been wondering, how will our statement of faith that you and I are beloved and that we together are creating beloved community, how will those ideas shape the space? And how will then the space for generations to come allow that love and liberation to flourish? So, beloved, I have to tell you, I have no proof that Adolf Hitler is in heaven. I have no proof in the goodness of humanity, nor the existence of God. I do not know. But I do know that here and where we are going, love is seated. It is seated in our architecture. It is seated in one another. It is seated in each and every time we call one another beloved. And that will continue to flourish with each time we have faith in it. May it be so. Amen.
You belong among the wildflowers. You belong in a boat out at sea. Sail away, kill off the hours. You belong somewhere you feel free.
Run away, find you a lover. Go away somewhere all bright and new. I have seen no other who compares with you. You belong among the wildflowers. You belong in a boat out at sea. You belong with your love on your arm. You belong somewhere you feel free. Run away, go find you a lover. Run away, let your heart be your guide. You deserve the deepest of cover. You belong in that home by and by. You belong among the wildflowers. You belong somewhere close to me. Far away from your trouble and worry. You belong somewhere you feel free. You belong somewhere you feel free.
As we go out into our weeks, leaving the beauty of this sanctuary, I offer you the words of John Murray, the father of Universalism here in New Jersey. He said, "Go out into the highways and byways, beloved. Give the people something of your new vision. You may possess a small light, but uncover it. Let it shine. Will you let it shine, beloved? Use it in order to bring more light, more understanding to the hearts and minds, the places of people everywhere. Give them not hell, beloved, but hope and courage. Be love. Amen."